We're talking with Vancouver City Councilperson Ellen Woodsworth. Hello, Ellen. I'm interested in knowing what your roots are in terms of becoming a gay lesbian activist and what you've done through your life.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for documenting the early stories of the gay and lesbian movement in Canada. I think this is a very important part of liberation movements in this country, although it's probably not the first wave, but at least we can record these parts of it before they are totally lost. So thank you for your work.
You're welcome, and thank you for your work, too.
I grew up in a family that was very active in social movements in Toronto, Ontario. And my name is Woodsworth. My great uncle was J.S. Woodsworth, and Grace McGinnis was my cousin. And I'll tell you a little story about Grace when we get later on into my story. Both of my parents were active in movements, from the nuclear disarmament movements to the early movements for childcare, for women's liberation. My mom was the first national YWCA representative on the status of women, NAC, National Action Committee on the Status of Women. My father was president of the Canadian Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. My mother grew up in a farming family in southern Ontario, and my father was born and raised in just outside of Kobe, Japan. His father was a professor of English and theology at a university in Conseil-Gauquin. And so I was very aware of both international events and also aware of social movements. So when the reading around the house was everything from Du Bois to Simone de Beauvoir to Jack London and Robert Service, and very much a combination of Canadiana and some of the leading intellectuals in the world that were concerned with issues around civil liberties and human rights and liberation movements. My father took us to Japan when I was 12, and then when I was 15, we moved to Japan for 2 years, and I went to China with my parents in 1965. And then when my father retired, he went and taught in China for 2 years, and I went and visited him in China. So I was very aware of what was happening in the early days in China and the civil rights movements within that liberation movement that came to power in 1949. And I grew up with 2 older brothers, so I was aware of the inequities, even within a progressive family, between men and women and older siblings and younger siblings. And by the time I was sort of just around puberty, I became aware that I was very attracted to women. Fortunately, I was in a background where I'd read some literature about homosexuality, so I knew of homosexuality, though it wasn't anything that I was, some friends of my parents were lesbians, and some of them were gay, but I didn't have a close relationship with anyone at that time.
How old were you when you decided that you were probably lesbian then?
I didn't decide I was a lesbian probably till just after I came back from the abortion cavalcade. In some ways it was a coming out personally, but it was also very much a coming out politically. So I came out as a lesbian feminist. I guess that was in around 1971. I was very much aware in Japan of being very badly in love with one of my classmates in school. At the same time, I was dating guys and going to events with guys, and but my closest friends were all women, and there was this particular woman, Cynthia, that I was very much in love with. And when I came back to Canada to attend the University of British Columbia, I was part of a powerful progressive movement at that time. There was the student movement, the occupation at SFU. I joined the Women's Caucus. I was elected head of the Speakers Bureau at UBC and set up a women's center in my office. I was in charge of bringing speakers to the university, so very aware of student movements, the first Red Power movement in Vancouver. As head of the Speakers Bureau, I was bringing in progressives from Gagnon, from Quebec, black activists, speakers from the Red Power movement, which was just getting going in Vancouver, women's movement activists. So I was very aware of the possibility of change and aware of the potential that I had to change my life through the changes around me. And when we, after many days of deliberation and hours of deliberation, decided that we were going to do a cross-country caravan to raise the issue of women's right to change, what became known as the abortion cavalcade, at that point I was very close to a number of lesbian artists in Vancouver and had already had an affair with a woman, but I was very closeted.
You were talking earlier about being involved at UBC, right? But you also mentioned the SFU occupation. Were you part of that as well? Or
No, I was supportive of the student occupation at Simon Fraser, and I was part of the UBC student occupation. And you know, it was an amazing time. We all thought we could make significant changes in the world and make the world better for everyone, including the academic context, and challenging the money that was pouring into the universities from the corporations, and they would set the agenda of research, as well as the format of learning. And we had a lot of concerns about how the university could be used to advance a more civil liberties agenda.
Can you tell me some details about the abortion caravan?
Yeah, the abortion cavalcade was something that was conceived of by the Vancouver Women's Liberation Caucus. That was a conglomerate of working women, women who were at UBC, a couple of us, and quite a number of women who were at Simon Fraser. And we had a little office at the Labor Temple on Broadway, just between Main and Cambie. The building still exists. And we decided we wanted to find an issue that brought together women from all different contexts, young and old, First Nations, new immigrants, and students and working women. And abortion seemed to be a clear issue. At that time, women were dying from illegal abortions. They were doing their own abortions. Doctors were deciding that they would abort First Nations women without telling them what they were doing. Women in mental hospitals were being sterilized. Women did not have the right to choose how their bodies were being treated. And this was just one aspect of it. So we talked to the Toronto Women's Liberation Movement and the women movement in Quebec, and smaller groupings of women's organizations across Canada, and we agreed that we needed to bring this to attention. We needed to bring attention to what the medical industry was doing to women's bodies. There still was not birth control on demand. Many of the birth control methods did not work, and women weren't able to freely get abortions. They were going to Japan, they were going to the United States, and many women were having unwanted children with serious repercussions for them and for their children. So we decided we would start from Vancouver with a number of vehicles, and then we would drive across the country talking to the media, talking to women's organizations, and drawing attention to what was happening across the nation, but also in those particular communities, to give some strength to those women who are terribly isolated in their individual situations.
So you were picking up people joining the caravan on the way, or the cavalcade on the way?
Yes, women would join us. Sometimes some of them came all the way to Ottawa, and some would just come for a portion of the caravan, come from one city to the next, or maybe across their province.